The dream didn't arrive like a trumpet blast. It came like a draft under a door, a thin ribbon of air sliding against her ankle as she stood in the kitchen on a Tuesday night, rinsing blueberries and listening to the house hum. The dishwasher churned. The neighborhood dogs traded gossip across picket fences. Somewhere in the street, a boy practiced jump shots against a garage, the rhythmic thump of the ball like a second heart. Ellen paused with her hands in the calendar. 50. Such a round number, tidy, authoritative, and yet strangely porous, like a fence with knots wide enough for a small animal to slip through. Her daughter Mia had a new apartment 3 states away and a job that paid better than Ellen's first 2 combined. Her son Lucas was in love with a woman who wore black boots in summer and said things like vulnerability is a strength in a voice that made Ellen both proud and slightly defensive. Her husband Tom had discovered electric bikes and now spoke the language of lumens and torque like a convert. And Ellen, after 27 years at the same insurance office, could fill out forms in her sleep. She could coax cranky software into purring. She could soothe furious clients with a voice like chamomile tea. Competent, reliable Ellen. The kind of woman supervisors counted on and holidays forgot. The draft found her again as she opened the fridge. She looked down at her feet, bare, good feet, veined like a map, and felt suddenly aware of how long they had carried her from one responsibility to the next. There had been years of ballet recitals, years of PTA, years of casseroles for neighbors whose grief or newborns required lasagna. Somewhere in there she had meant to sign up for a 5K, remember? When Mia was 10 and the school sent home a flyer with purple clip art sneakers. She had pinned it to the corkboard and then recycled it a month later, sponge in hand, wiping away the thumbtack hole. That night, the whisper nudged her, run a marathon. It sounded ridiculous as soon as it formed words. Not a 5K, not a charity walk, 42 kilometers and change. A number that big didn't belong to a woman who sometimes lost her phone in the pantry. But the whisper refused to leave, as patient as breath. She took her blueberries to the table and scrolled on her phone. Marathon at 50, she typed, half expecting the internet to spit out a gentle, age-appropriate rebuke. Instead, dozens of faces met her, women with silver streaks, women with soft bellies and sharp eyes, women who'd started late and kept going. Some had bibs pinned crooked to their shirts and joy pinned straight to their faces. One caption read, started at 49. Finished at 52. PR at 54. Age is a number, grit is a choice. Ellen's mouth did something unfamiliar, lifted at the sides without permission. Tom came in from the garage with his helmet under his arm, cheeks flushed. You should see the sunset, he said. Like the sky forgot it's not supposed to show off on a Tuesday. She held up her phone. Do you think, she heard herself as if from another room, do you think I could run a marathon? He blinked. Tom was, by nature, a cautious man, and by training an engineer. He believed in load limits and margin for error. But he also believed in Ellen. Do you want to? I don't know, she said truthfully. Maybe I want to. He smiled softly. That's how a lot of good things start. They ate dinner with the local news low in the background. The anchor's hair didn't move. The headlines did. Ellen registered them the way one absorbs weather. Floods there, layoffs here, the curve of the world slanting toward entropy. After the dishes, she went to the closet and found an old pair of running shoes she had bought for walking but never broke in. The laces felt stiff, like a new thought. Outside, the early spring air smelled like damp soil and someone's distant barbecue. Streetlights pierced the dusk in warm pearls. Ellen stood on the sidewalk and told herself she would jog to the second mailbox and back. 2 mailboxes. Modest ambition. Manageable failure. She set off. The first 10 steps felt like betrayal. Her body filed a complaint with management. Her calves tugged, her lungs negotiated, her sports bra, veteran of many laundry cycles, offered minimal enthusiasm. By the first mailbox, she was astonished by the racket inside her chest. By the second, she considered pretending she'd dropped her keys and needed to stop. She didn't stop. She turned around and shuffled home, cheeks prickling, heart banging like a drumline out of sync. At her front door, she leaned against the siding and laughed, breathless. She had run for what, 90 seconds? Maybe 100? She felt ridiculous and lit from within. The house looked the same as it always had, friendly and square. The shrubs made their tidy humps. But the doorway was different, somehow, like a border crossing with no customs agent, as if she'd slipped into a country where possibility issued new currency. Upstairs, she Googled couch to 5K and downloaded a beginner plan. The app cheerfully scheduled her for 3 runs a week and sandwiched them between icons of water bottles and small green checkmarks that promised dopamine if she tapped them. She set an alarm for 6 a.m., bold with adrenaline, then marked it week 1, day 1. She fell asleep wondering who she was when no one else needed her. In the morning, the alarm rang like a dare. The sky was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. The birds had not yet convened their council. Ellen made coffee, laced her shoes, and stood in the hallway listening to the house breathe. It felt transgressive to leave before the day asked anything of her. She texted Tom, out running. "If I'm not back in 30, I joined the circus," and stepped into the cool. The app told her when to run, when to walk. The running parts were brief bursts, really, but each burst carried a weight measured in doubt per second. She watched the neighborhood wake, a woman dragging a trash bin with a squeak like a tiny mouse, a teenager with a hoodie up, a dog whose whole body wagged, not just his tail. She ran past a little free library that she'd never noticed before and wondered how many secret kindnesses she missed in a normal day, hustling from task to task. Halfway through, a stitch jabbed her side like a rude elbow. She breathed into it and kept going. At the end, sweat freckled her hairline, and a small pride loosened her spine. The app played a tinny fanfare. She wanted to cry for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. At work, the fluorescence felt harsher than usual, the headsets heavier. She answered emails with her usual competency and in between, looked up race calendars. The city marathon in 6 months had a charity partnership with a literacy nonprofit she loved. 6 months. If she progressed from 5K to 10K to half, she could, maybe, arrive at the starting line prepared enough not to be unceremoniously scraped off the pavement. The thought made her stomach perform a slow somersault. During lunch, she called Mia. "Mom, how are you?" "Questionably sane," Ellen said. "I think I want to run a marathon." There was a beat, and then a squeal that startled a coworker at the next cubicle. "Are you serious? That's amazing." Ellen had braced for skepticism. The flood of enthusiasm made her laugh. "Don't you think I'm a little old?" "Old for what? Making decisions about your own life?" Mia's voice softened. "You've spent my entire life cheering me on from the sidelines. I would love to return the favor." After they hung up, Ellen sat still for a long minute. She thought of the years she had measured her worth by how well she caught other people's needs as they fell from the sky. There had been such meaning in that, real marrow-deep meaning. But maybe, at 50, she could add a new column to the ledger, not just catching but reaching. She found a local running group online, Wednesday nights, meet at the park pavilion, all paces welcome. The words all paces had the potential to be a lie. She decided to give them one chance to prove otherwise. Wednesday arrived with the sky dressed in a kind of optimism blue. Ellen changed in the office restroom and tucked her work shoes into her tote. She drove to the park with the radio off, listening to the small voices that rose whenever she tried something new. "You'll be the slowest one there. They'll talk in jargon and laugh in miles. You'll look like an imposter in last season's leggings." The pavilion was a rectangle of light on the grass. A cluster of people stretched and chatted, the ease between them like the afterglow of shared hardship. A woman about Ellen's age waved. She had the exact haircut Ellen had once envied on a news anchor, sleek bob, silver streaks purposeful rather than surrendered. "First time?" the woman asked. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you're standing like a cat about to bolt," the woman said kindly. "I'm Rena." "Ellen." "Welcome, Ellen. We've got tortoises and hares and everything in between. I'm somewhere in the turtle family myself." A man with a whistle, Coach Dave, according to his t-shirt, clapped his hands. "All right, team. Same route as usual. New folks, find someone who looks like they run the pace you're aiming for and introduce yourself. No heroes tonight, keep it conversational." Ellen was not yet fluent in runner, but she understood no heroes. She scanned for the slowest cluster and ended up with Rena and a tall college kid named Nate who was recovering from an ankle sprain and claimed he needed accountability to not be dumb. They set off at a pace that let Ellen talk in short, unpoetic sentences. "Why do you run?" she asked Rena. "Because I can," Rena said simply. "There were years I couldn't. Autoimmune mess. It's a privilege to move. And you? Ellen opened her mouth to say something self-deprecating and found, instead, the truth. Because I'm curious what else I can be. Rena's smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. That's my favorite answer. They looped the lake. Sunset bruised into lavender. Middle schoolers played ultimate frisbee on the field, shouting in the language of elastic bodies. Coach Dave jogged past them backward, because apparently he had decided to be both coach and traffic cop. How we doing, turtles? Majestic and slow. Nate yelled. By the end, Ellen's legs hummed. The group lingered, trading tips about socks and hydration and the kind of chafing one only discusses among friends. No one made a face at her pace. No one asked why a woman her age wanted to do this. The relief felt like a warm towel after a cold swim. At home, Ellen stood in front of the bathroom mirror with a foam roller, an instrument of torture disguised as a pool toy, and learned how to knead the knots from her muscles. Tom knocked and peeked in. How was it? I didn't die. That's a solid outcome. She pressed the roller into her glut and yelped. Do you think, she said through her teeth, there's a way to get better at something without being bad first? If there is, I've never found it. He lowered his voice, as if in a cathedral. I'm proud of you. She looked at him in the mirror, his familiar face framed in the doorway, and felt a rush of affection so sudden it almost hurt. They had built a life on the scaffolding of schedules and compromises, of taking turns being brave. For years, she had believed her bravery was a private thing, a quiet persistence no one else could see. Maybe this was a new kind, the visible kind, the kind that made you pin a number to your shirt and step into a street lined with strangers. That night, as she turned off the lamp, she let the whisper speak without interruption. Run a marathon. The words no longer sounded ridiculous. They sounded like a door, slightly ajar, a stripe of light across the floor. In the morning, she would lace up again. Not because she was fast. Not because she was young. Because somewhere between the mailbox and the pavilion, she had remembered a part of herself she'd misplaced in the long, generous years of tending to everyone else. She wasn't done tending. But she could add her own name to the list. And the sky, punctual as ever, would blush at the horizon, as if embarrassed to be caught showing off on a weekday. Ellen would step into the cool and begin again, to move toward the woman she had always suspected was waiting for her at the edge of effort. Not a different person, but a deeper one, made of the same parts arranged with intention. The dream didn't shout. It didn't need to. She had heard it. And now, finally, she was listening. The first weeks of training did not feel like transformation. They felt like humiliation. Ellen's lungs, once invisible servants, suddenly became the loudest voices in her body. Each run began with optimism, collapsed into a shuffle, and ended with her hands braced on her knees, gasping like a stranded fish. She wondered more than once if she was asking too much of a body that had spent decades as a workhorse for other people's needs. Her knees in particular were quick to complain. They were veteran joints, after all, 50 years of stairs and carpool duty and crouching to pick up Legos in the dark. By week 3, they had developed a vocabulary of creaks and pops that spoke louder than any doctor's warning. She countered with ice packs, stretches she learned from YouTube, and a cautious optimism that bordered on denial. Running, she discovered, was not simply about moving forward. It was about negotiating peace treaties with every muscle group. Calves, hamstrings, hips, all filed grievances. And yet, after every run, a strange sweetness lingered, like the aftertaste of dark chocolate. She would sit on the porch steps, sweat dripping, and feel a quiet bloom of accomplishment. Not triumph, not yet, but a promise that something inside her was waking up. The insurance office where she worked had recently upgraded to ergonomic chairs, and Ellen became acutely aware of the contrast between her professional life and her new pursuit. At her desk, she was still efficient, a woman measured in keystrokes. In her running shoes, she was awkward, loud-breathing, and very much alive. Sometimes, she caught herself daydreaming about her next run while answering a client call about deductibles. It was as if her body had conspired with her imagination to create a second parallel life. When she mentioned her new hobby at the office, the reactions were mixed. "You're running? Like actual running?" asked Denise from accounting, whose eyebrows had been permanently arched since the Clinton administration. "Yes," Ellen replied evenly. "How far?" "Not far. Yet." Denise tilted her head with the skepticism of someone examining a knockoff handbag. Well, don't ruin your knees. At our age, we have to be careful. Ellen smiled politely, but later in the restroom mirror, she whispered to her reflection, at our age, we have to be bold. The Wednesday running group became her anchor. Rena, the silver-haired woman who had welcomed her, took Ellen under her wing with a warmth that was equal parts friendship and mentorship. Rule number 1, Rena said one night as they stretched, is that no one cares about your pace but you. And maybe your watch, if you wear one. Rule number 2, finish lines are more important than finish times. Ellen repeated those words like a mantra during her runs. Coach Dave, gruff but kind, doled out encouragement in odd metaphors. Running is like making pancakes, he told them during a water break. The first one's always ugly. Doesn't mean you stop making breakfast. Nate, the college kid recovering from his sprained ankle, had a habit of calling Ellen Ms. E, and sprinting the last 100 yards of every run, just to prove he was healing. Ellen secretly enjoyed the title. It made her feel both respected and mischievous, like a superhero's alter ego. One Saturday morning, Ellen decided to test herself with a long run, a grand term for 4 miles. She mapped a route through her neighborhood, past the bakery that smelled of cinnamon and yeast, past the library with its mural of children reading beneath a painted tree. She carried a small water bottle and wore a neon vest that made her look like a crossing guard on a mission. The first mile was steady, even joyful. The second mile began to unravel. By the third, her breath had gone ragged, and a blister formed a small fiery rebellion on her heel. She stopped at the corner of Maple and 3rd, bent double, and wondered if this was the part where sensible people turned around. A passing cyclist slowed. You okay? Ellen straightened, forced a smile, and gave a thumbs up. Training run, she managed. The cyclist nodded knowingly. First rule, don't quit at the corner. Always quit after the corner. She laughed despite the pain and kept going, just 1 block more. By the time she reached home, the blister had blossomed into a raw badge of honor. She sank onto her porch, unlaced her shoes, and stared at the tiny wound with an odd tenderness. Pain, she realized, was not just an obstacle. It was a teacher. It taught her where she was fragile, and where she was strong. At dinner that evening, Tom noticed her limp. Overdid it? Maybe, she admitted. 4 miles. His eyebrows rose. That's impressive. Impressive or reckless? Both, he said, grinning. But mostly impressive. Lucas and his girlfriend dropped by later with takeout. When Ellen mentioned her training, Lucas raised an eyebrow. Mom, marathons aren't exactly middle-aged friendly. Neither is life, she shot back, surprising herself with the sharpness of her tone. His girlfriend laughed. I love that. Ellen softened. Look, I'm not trying to set a world record. I just want to see what I can do. For me. For the first time in years, she saw her son look at her with the kind of respect he usually reserved for athletes on TV. By the second month, small changes crept into her life. She slept deeper. Her appetite shifted from mindless snacking to deliberate fuel. She found herself reaching for salmon and roasted vegetables instead of chips. Not always, but often enough to notice. Her clothes fit differently, not dramatically, but with a subtle looseness that hinted at transformation. More than that, her posture changed. At the office, she stood straighter. At home, she moved with a quiet confidence that surprised Tom, who once commented, "You walk like you have a secret." She did. The secret was that she was falling in love, with herself, with the rhythm of her breath, with the possibility that 50 could be a beginning, not an ending. One evening, after a particularly grueling group run, Rena and Ellen sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Fireflies winked like tiny conspirators in the dusk. You're improving fast, Rena said. Doesn't feel fast. That's the trick. Improvement always feels slower than it looks. Ellen hesitated, then asked, why do you think people my age get told so often to slow down, to play it safe? Rena thought for a moment. Because safety is comforting. And because if we prove them wrong, it unsettles their idea of what's possible. Some people don't want to be unsettled. Ellen absorbed that in silence, watching the water ripple. She realized she wasn't just training her body, she was training her narrative. For years, she had accepted the script, Middle-aged women shrink their ambitions, fade into support roles, cheer from the sidelines. Now, every mile was an edit, every run a rewrite. On the 8th week of training, Coach Dave surprised them with a hill workout. "We run up, jog down, repeat," he announced. Groans erupted. Ellen considered sneaking back to her car. But she stayed. The hill was brutal, steep enough to make her calves scream. On the 3rd climb, she nearly quit. Rena jogged beside her, murmuring, "One mailbox at a time. Don't look at the top." So Ellen focused on the nearest mailbox, then the next, then the next. When she finally crested the hill, lungs aflame, the city stretched out below them in a scatter of lights. She felt taller than the skyline. At the bottom, Coach Dave nodded approvingly. "That's how marathons are run. Not in miles. In mailboxes." Ellen smiled, chest still heaving. For the first time, the finish line of 26.2 miles seemed not impossible, but inevitable, one mailbox at a time. That night, soaking sore muscles in a hot bath, Ellen closed her eyes and replayed the hill in her mind. Each step had been a negotiation between quitting and continuing. And continuing had won. She thought of the women she had seen online, the ones who started late and finished strong. She thought of Mia's voice on the phone, bright with belief. She thought of her own reflection whispering, "At our age, we have to be bold." Ellen smiled in the candlelight. Bold didn't mean reckless. Bold meant beginning again, on tired knees, with a heart stubborn enough to dream. By the time spring stretched into summer, Ellen had discovered that running wasn't just about lacing up and moving her feet. It was about rituals. She began to think of them as small ceremonies, acts that turned ordinary mornings into something sacred. There was the ritual of tying her laces twice, always twice, as if the second knot were a seal of intention. The ritual of sipping black coffee while scrolling the weather app, muttering to herself like a ship's captain, 64 degrees, humidity 70%, chance of thunderstorms by noon. And the ritual of whispering, before stepping out the door, "Just get to the first mile." Because the truth was this, the first mile never felt graceful. It was clumsy, awkward, a negotiation between muscles that had not yet woken and lungs that insisted they had other priorities. But somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd mile, grace arrived. Her body remembered, adjusted, accepted. Running stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like permission. On Saturdays, her group did long runs. For veterans, that meant double-digit miles. For Ellen, it meant anything longer than her weekday jogs. 6 miles. 7. One morning in late May, she hit 8, longer than she had ever traveled on her own 2 feet without stopping. The path wound through the riverfront trail, shaded by cottonwood trees that dropped fluff like summer snow. The air smelled faintly of fish and cut grass. Nate, nearly healed, bounded ahead, while Rena stayed beside Ellen with an easy rhythm. "Remember," Rena said, "distance isn't conquered in a single stride. It's layered. Every mile builds on the last. Like laying bricks." Ellen nodded, though by mile 6 her legs felt like bricks themselves. Still, when they finished, she realized something extraordinary. Her body, though sore, had not betrayed her. Her knees, though tired, had carried her without collapsing. She had given them miles, and they had given her resilience. That afternoon, she collapsed into her porch chair with a bottle of Gatorade and texted Mia, 8 miles. "Who even am I?" The reply came fast, "You're my hero." Ellen stared at the words for a long time, letting them soak into places she hadn't known were dry. Running also began to change her relationship with food. For years, food had been tied to emotion, comfort, stress, reward. Now it was tied to fuel. She learned which breakfasts made her run strong, oatmeal, bananas, a spoonful of peanut butter, and which sabotaged them, the leftover pizza that sat like lead in her stomach. At the grocery store, she found herself drawn to food she once dismissed as health nut fare: sweet potatoes, chickpeas, chia seeds. She blended smoothies with spinach and Greek yogurt, marveling that they tasted better than the vending machine candy bars she used to inhale at 3 p.m. Tom teased her. "Next thing I know, you'll be sprinkling flaxseed on everything." "Don't tempt me," she said, grinning. But privately, she noticed the ripple effect: more energy at work, fewer headaches, deeper sleep. Even her skin seemed to glow. She began to suspect that this whole healthy lifestyle thing wasn't a scam after all. The shift was not only physical but mental. Running demanded a focus Ellen hadn't practiced in years. In the office, her attention was scattered across tasks, emails, meetings. At home, it was fragmented between chores and family. But on the trail, attention narrowed. 1 step, 1 breath, 1 mile. She began to understand why seasoned runners spoke of running as meditation. The steady rhythm of footfalls became a mantra. The steady inhale-exhale became prayer. Sometimes, she returned home not only lighter in body but in spirit, as if she had dropped a backpack of invisible worries somewhere along the path. Yet meditation was not always serene. On bad days, her mind became a heckler. You're too slow. You look ridiculous. You'll never make 26 miles. What are you trying to prove? When that voice grew loud, she answered with stubbornness. 1 more mailbox. 1 more step. And often, that was enough. By midsummer, she reached her first double-digit run, 10 miles. It was not pretty. The temperature was already 80 by 8 a.m., the air thick as soup. Sweat soaked her visor, and salt stung her eyes. By mile 7, her legs screamed mutiny. By mile 8, she nearly quit. But she remembered Coach Dave's words, no heroes, just finish. So she slowed, shuffled, bargained with herself. And when she stumbled across the imaginary finish line at mile 10, she burst into tears. Not delicate, movie scene tears, messy, snotty sobs of disbelief. Rena hugged her without flinching. Nate offered a high five so enthusiastic it nearly knocked her over. 10 miles. Double digits. Ellen thought of all the ways she had once defined herself: mother, wife, employee. Now there was another word: runner. The long runs gave her more than mileage. They gave her solitude. On weekdays, she often trained alone, looping familiar streets while the world still slept. She began to notice things she had overlooked for years: the old man who watered his roses at dawn, the stray cat who perched on the corner fence like a sentry, the way the sunrise painted the asphalt pink before the cars arrived to erase it. Sometimes she ran past her children's old elementary school, where swings creaked in the wind. She remembered pushing Mia so high she squealed with both fear and delight, Lucas running wild across the soccer field. Now both children were grown, lives stretching beyond her. Running, she realized, was not only about moving forward, it was also about revisiting the past, carrying it gently in her stride. Her body changed, too. She lost a few pounds, yes, but more importantly, she gained muscle where she hadn't seen it in decades. Her calves sculpted themselves into firm lines. Her arms, from carrying water bottles and swinging with determination, grew stronger. Even her core, once dismissed as permanently softened by motherhood, tightened in subtle but undeniable ways. One evening, as she changed for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused. The woman staring back was not the 20-something version she sometimes longed for. But she was not diminished. She was fierce, vibrant, carrying the marks of both endurance and grace. For the first time in years, Ellen whispered to her reflection not criticism but gratitude: "Thank you for carrying me." The marathon still loomed like a mountain, distant and intimidating. But Ellen began to trust the process. Every long run was a rehearsal, every ache a teacher, every mile a deposit in a bank account she could withdraw on race day. And beneath it all was grit, the grit to rise when the alarm buzzed, to lace up when her knees groaned, to keep moving when the world offered easier options. But there was also grace, the grace to forgive herself when she slowed, when she skipped a run, when life intervened. Grit and grace, she realized, were not opposites. They were partners. Grit carried her forward, grace let her rest. Together they built not only a runner, but a woman who was learning, at 50, that strength was not just in the body but in the decision to begin again, every single day. That evening, she sat on the porch with Tom, fireflies dancing across the yard. He asked, "So how far today?" 10 miles, she said, almost casually, though pride glowed in her chest. He whistled low. "You know, I bike 10 miles and think it's a workout." Ellen laughed. "Maybe we're both stronger than we think." They sat in companionable silence, the night warm, the stars flickering awake. Ellen thought of the road behind her, the road ahead, and the miles still to come. She no longer doubted she would stand at the marathon's starting line. The question had shifted. It was no longer "can I?" but "how far can I go?" And somewhere in the rhythm of her heartbeat, steady and strong, she suspected the answer: farther than she had ever imagined. By midsummer, Ellen had begun to believe in her momentum. Every week added a new layer of mileage, every long run felt like bricks laid in a sturdy wall. She'd grown used to the routine: lace up, run, recover, repeat. It was almost comfortable. Which, she would later realize, was precisely when life tends to send a storm. It began with a twinge. Just a whisper in her right knee, nothing dramatic. She noticed it during a 7-mile weekday run, a faint pinch that arrived around mile 5 and disappeared when she slowed. She iced it, brushed it off, told herself it was just part of building strength. But by the weekend's long run, the whisper had turned into a complaint. Each step felt like a question mark. Will this hold? Will this fail? At the trailhead, Coach Dave raised an eyebrow. You're limping. It's nothing, Ellen insisted. Nothing is how most injuries introduce themselves, he said dryly. She ran anyway, stubborn as ever. By mile 6, pain radiated sharp enough to make her catch her breath. Rena jogged at her side, concerned. You need to stop. I need to finish, Ellen said through clenched teeth. You need to last, Rena countered. Ellen slowed, pride stinging worse than the knee. She hated stopping. Hated the idea that her body might betray her just as she was proving everyone wrong. But later, with an ice pack balanced on her leg and frustration tightening her chest, she admitted the truth: rest was not optional. The doctor confirmed what she feared: mild runner's knee. Not catastrophic, but a warning. You're building mileage fast for someone your age, he cautioned. You need cross-training, strength work, and patience. Take 2 weeks off running. Focus on cycling, swimming, stretching. 2 weeks. To Ellen, it sounded like exile. She left the clinic with a handout full of diagrams and a head full of doubts. At home, she snapped at Tom for leaving a mug in the sink. She glared at the treadmill, useless now. She sulked through dinners. Finally, Tom said gently, It's 2 weeks, Ellen. Not the end of the world. It feels like the end of the road, she muttered. No, he said, meeting her eyes. It's just a detour. The detour was humbling. She joined a local pool and flailed her way through lap swimming. The lifeguard, a teenager with earbuds dangling from his neck, assured her that half the adults looked the same on their first day. Still, Ellen felt awkward, ungainly, like she had borrowed someone else's sport. Cycling on a stationary bike bore her senseless, but she reminded herself that strong quads meant stronger knees. She discovered yoga videos online and grumbled through poses that felt impossible, until one day, after weeks of trying, she managed a decent downward dog and felt absurdly triumphant. Slowly, grudgingly, she admitted that the break was teaching her something important. Resilience wasn't only about pushing forward. Sometimes, it was about pausing without surrender. The storms weren't only physical. At work, budget cuts meant longer hours and shorter tempers. Ellen found herself staying late, drowning in spreadsheets, then dragging herself home too tired to stretch. The marathon began to feel like a selfish indulgence. Who was she to spend hours training when her office needed her, when her family still expected her presence? Lucas called one night, voice tight with stress about his job. Ellen listened, offered advice, hung up, and then felt a pang of guilt. While she chased miles, her son was fighting his own battles. Was she abandoning him by focusing so much on herself? The doubts multiplied. One evening over dinner, she confessed to Tom, maybe I should quit. Maybe marathons are for people younger, stronger, less distracted. He set down his fork. Ellen, when have you ever been the kind of person to quit something just because it got hard? She opened her mouth, ready to argue. Then she thought of the decades she had spent juggling children, career, aging parents, community obligations. Quitting had never been her default. Why start now? Still, the temptation to give up lingered, like a shadow at the edge of her vision. A week later, she returned to the running group, not to run, but to walk while others logged miles. She felt conspicuously slow, but Rena matched her pace without complaint. You think running is about legs, Rena said quietly. But it's about heart. Injuries heal. What matters is whether you come back. Ellen swallowed hard. What if I don't? Then you'll learn something else. But from where I'm standing, you're too stubborn not to return. Ellen laughed through the lump in her throat. Stubborn. Yes, that word fit. By early fall, she was running again, gingerly, cautiously. 3 miles, then 5. Each comeback run felt both exhilarating and terrifying, as if the ground might crack beneath her at any moment. But the knee held. One Saturday, she braved a 12-mile-long run, her farthest yet. The trail was slick with last night's rain, puddles reflecting the sky. By mile 9, her legs trembled. By mile 10, fatigue pressed like a heavy hand on her shoulders. At mile 11, thunder rumbled in the distance. "You've got this," Rena urged, steady beside her. Lightning forked across the horizon. Coach Dave shouted for everyone to cut the run short, safety first. But Ellen clenched her jaw and kept going. Stubbornness surged like fuel. The rain caught them on the last mile, sheets of water, cold and drenching. Ellen's shoes squelched, hair plastered to her face, every step a battle against mud and gravity. And yet, she laughed. Out loud. Wild, breathless laughter. She finished the 12 miles soaked, shivering, exhausted, and radiant. That evening, wrapped in a blanket with tea steaming in her hands, Ellen reflected on the storm. She realized she had been waiting for proof, for some cosmic reassurance that she could indeed call herself a runner. The proof hadn't come on sunny days when everything went right. It had come in rain, in pain, in setbacks that demanded stubbornness. The marathon was no longer an abstract dream. It was a promise she had made to herself, and she was too stubborn to break it. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Saw this quote and thought of you." She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her way, she adjusted her sails. "That's you, Mom." Ellen smiled, tears welling. Adjusting sails. Yes. That's what this chapter of her life was about, not waiting for perfect weather, but learning how to steer anyway. And as she tied her shoelaces, twice as always, she whispered, "Let's see where the storm takes us." Ellen had always been fluent in other people's stories. For years, her life was measured in other people's milestones, her children's report cards, her boss's promotions, her parents' declining health. She was the editor of everyone else's chapters, smoothing rough drafts, filling gaps, making sure the narrative flowed. But now, as the marathon drew closer, she realized she was drafting a story that belonged only to her. And part of writing her story meant confronting the stories people told about women her age. The whispers started small. At work, Denise from accounting cornered her in the break room, eyes wide with faux concern. "You're still running? Training for that marathon thing?" "Yes," Ellen replied evenly. Denise stirred her coffee with exaggerated slowness. "Don't you worry about, heart attacks? I read an article about women over 50 dropping dead from sudden exertion." Ellen's jaw tightened. "I also read an article about the benefits of exercise lowering heart attack risk." Denise blinked, lips pursed, as if Ellen had violated an unspoken rule by refusing to play fragile. Later, at Sunday dinner, her sister chimed in, "Why not just do the half marathon? 13 miles is plenty impressive. No one will think less of you." "No one but me," Ellen answered, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. She began to notice how often the phrase "at your age" crept into conversations. It was used like bubble wrap, as if women in their 50s needed constant cushioning. "At your age, you should take it easy. At your age, you should focus on yoga. At your age, marathons are risky." But Ellen was tired of bubble wrap. She wanted edges, grit, truth. She wanted to rewrite the sentence, "At my age, I am strong. At my age, I am bold. At my age, I run marathons." So she owned the narrative. Literally. She registered officially for the city marathon. A click on the website, a charge on her credit card, an email confirmation with her bib number. A number that was hers, tethered to her name. When the email arrived, she stared at it like a sacred document. She printed it and taped it to her refrigerator, where she could see it every morning. Tom kissed her on the cheek when he saw it. "Now it's real," he said. "Yes," she whispered. "Now it's real." Owning the narrative also meant embracing solitude. Training ramped up, long runs stretching into hours. On Saturdays, the group often started together but splintered as paces diverged. Ellen sometimes found herself alone on the trail, the city waking slowly around her. She discovered that solitude was not emptiness. It was a mirror. Without conversation to distract her, she faced her own thoughts, unfiltered. Some were cruel: "You're too slow, too old, too late. Some were tender, "Look how far you've come." One crisp October morning, she ran 14 miles by herself. By mile 12, loneliness settled on her shoulders, heavy as a weighted vest. She almost quit. But then she remembered a line she'd read on a running blog: "Loneliness is just solitude waiting to be claimed." So she claimed it. She lifted her chin, counted her breaths, and reframed the silence as strength. By the time she staggered into her driveway, sweat-soaked and trembling, she no longer feared being alone with herself. Her daughter Mia called during one of those weeks and said, "Mom, I told my coworkers about you." They were blown away. One of them said, "I hope I'm half that brave at 50. Ellen flushed. "Brave? I don't know about that. Stubborn, maybe." "Stubborn is brave in disguise," Mia said. "Don't downplay it." Ellen thought about that for days. For years, she had dismissed her persistence as nothing special. But maybe stubbornness was more than refusal, it was a form of courage. With the marathon looming 2 months away, the training plan entered its most grueling phase. Weekly mileage crept higher. Long runs stretched to 15, 16, 17 miles. Each distance was farther than she had ever traveled in her life. On those runs, she practiced reframing pain. Instead of cursing sore muscles, she called them evidence. Evidence that she was adapting, growing, pushing. When she slowed to a shuffle, she reminded herself that even a shuffle was progress. Coach Dave reminded them, "Every mile you run in training is money in the bank. On race day, you'll make a withdrawal. But you have to keep making deposits." Ellen deposited faithfully. One Saturday, she ran 18 miles, her longest yet. The last 3 miles nearly broke her. Her body screamed, her vision blurred, and the wall loomed. The infamous wall runners warned about, the point where glycogen stores bottom out and the body begs for mercy. She stumbled to a stop beneath a bridge, hands on her thighs. Doubt flooded her. If 18 feels like death, how will I survive 26? And then she remembered something Rena had said, "The wall isn't the end. It's the beginning of who you are beyond comfort." So Ellen forced herself upright, took a gel packet from her belt, and started again. One step, then another. She made it home, collapsed on her porch, and cried, not from despair but from awe. She had met the wall and climbed over it. At work the next week, during a stressful meeting, Ellen surprised herself by staying calm while others panicked. She realized that long runs had taught her something beyond fitness, the art of enduring discomfort without breaking. When a colleague snapped, she breathed steadily, the same rhythm she used on the trail. When deadlines piled up, she thought, 1 mile at a time. One task at a time. Her training bled into her life, a secret strength woven into ordinary hours. By November, the taper approached, the part of training where mileage decreases to let the body recover before the big day. But Ellen wasn't there yet. She had one more long run on the calendar, 20 miles. 20. Nearly the full marathon distance. The night before, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the journey, mailboxes, blisters, storms, ice packs. The narrative she had inherited, middle-aged women don't do things like this, felt smaller now, almost laughable. Because tomorrow, she would run 20 miles. And whether anyone else believed in her or not, she believed in herself. The 20-mile run was brutal and beautiful. Brutal in its toll, aches in every joint, a blister that bled through her sock, hunger gnawing at her insides. Beautiful in its revelation, she was capable of more than she'd ever thought. When she finished, collapsing on the grass at the park, Rena gripped her hand. "You're ready. The marathon will be hard, but you're ready." Ellen smiled, weak but fierce. "I'm ready." And for the first time, she truly believed it. That night, she taped a new sentence next to her bib confirmation on the fridge. In bold letters, it read, "At my age, I am unstoppable." The training plan had been relentless, week after week of climbing mileage, pushing limits, layering fatigue upon fatigue. Ellen had grown accustomed to waking with sore legs, to scheduling her weekends around double-digit runs, to icing her knees while watching the evening news. So when taper finally arrived, she expected relief. Instead, she felt panic. The taper meant cutting mileage, running less, resting more. The science was clear, the body needed recovery before race day. But Ellen's brain, so used to equating effort with progress, rebelled. Every skipped mile felt like a betrayal. Every rest day whispered danger: you'll lose fitness. You'll slow down. You'll arrive at the starting line unprepared. Her watch buzzed less often, her legs twitched with unused energy, and her doubts grew louder. It felt like walking away from the piano a week before the recital. One evening, restless, she flipped through the pages of her training log. Numbers and notes filled the margins. 5 miles, humid but strong. 16 miles, blisters but finished. 20 miles, wall. Survived. Each entry was proof of work done, deposits made. Still, the silence of taper unnerved her. At group practice, Coach Dave clapped his hands. Listen, people. Taper madness is real. You'll feel lazy, anxious, paranoid. Ignore it. Trust your training. The hay is in the barn. The hay is in the barn. Ellen asked. Exactly, Dave said. You've already done the hard work. The barn is full. Now all you have to do is keep it dry until race day. It was meant to reassure, but Ellen couldn't help picturing soggy hay. Her anxiety bled into other parts of her life. At work, she double-checked spreadsheets compulsively. At home, she reorganized the pantry twice in 1 week. Tom teased her gently. You know the cereal doesn't care what shelf it's on, right? She tried to laugh, but tension curled inside her like a coiled spring. The marathon loomed so large that everything else felt like background noise. And then one night, Mia came to visit. Her daughter's presence filled the house with an energy Ellen hadn't realized she'd missed. Mia moved with the confident clatter of a young woman who belonged fully to her own life, but still dropped her bag on the same chair she'd claimed as a teenager. Over dinner, they talked about work, about Mia's friends, about Lucas's relationship. But Ellen sensed her daughter studying her more closely than usual. Finally, when the dishes were done, Mia said, Mom, can we talk? Just us. They settled on the porch, night air cool, stars stitched across the sky. Ellen braced herself. You're nervous, Mia said gently. Ellen exhaled. Is it that obvious? You fidget every time you say the word marathon. Like the word itself might break you. Ellen laughed softly. It might. I keep thinking, what if I fail? What if I collapse halfway? What if everyone sees me as foolish for trying? Mia leaned forward. Do you know what I see? A woman who raised 2 kids, built a career, held our family together, and then decided that wasn't enough. You're rewriting what 50 looks like. That's not foolish. That's fierce. Ellen swallowed hard. But I'm scared. Of course you are, Mia said. But Mom, fear isn't the enemy. It's the proof that you're doing something worth the risk. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the cicadas hum. Then Ellen asked quietly, do you think it's selfish? All these hours spent running, when I could be doing more for you, for Lucas, for Dad. Mia's voice softened. Mom, for years, you put everyone else first. You drove us to practices, worked late, took care of Grandma, cooked dinners, cleaned up messes. You gave and gave. This, she gestured toward the training log on the table, this is yours. And it doesn't take anything from us. It gives us something. It shows me, at least, that I don't have to shrink as I get older. That I can keep growing. You're giving me permission to dream bigger. Ellen blinked back tears. She hadn't thought of it that way. To her, running was an indulgence. To her daughter, it was an inheritance. Later that night, after Mia had gone to bed, Ellen stayed up staring at the marathon confirmation on the fridge. She realized she had been carrying the wrong question all along. It wasn't what if I fail? The real question was what if I never tried? That thought loosened the knot in her chest. During the taper weeks, Ellen found new rhythms. Shorter runs gave her time to notice details she'd overlooked in the grind of training. The way the trees blushed crimson in November, the way her breath puffed white in the chill air, the way her shadow stretched long and lean in the low sun. She let herself enjoy the ease of 3-mile jogs, the lightness of legs that weren't weighed down by exhaustion. She treated rest as fuel rather than absence. She taped a note above her bed, trust the taper. One evening, she and Tom walked hand in hand through the neighborhood. He glanced at her, smiling. You're different, you know. Not just fitter. Lighter. Like you set something down. Maybe I did, she said. Maybe I set down the idea that 50 means fading. He squeezed her hand. I like this version of you. Not that I didn't like the old one. But this one shines. Ellen smiled into the night, warmth flooding her chest. For the first time in weeks, taper didn't feel like loss. It felt like anticipation, like the quiet breath before a song begins. The marathon was days away now. Ellen laid out her gear on the bed, shoes broken in, race day outfit chosen, energy gels lined up like tiny soldiers. She pinned her bib to her shirt and stood back, staring. It was real. Before turning off the light, she whispered the words Mia had given her, fear isn't the enemy. It's proof. She slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The alarm rang at 4:30 a.m. The city outside was still wrapped in darkness, but Ellen was already awake, nerves pulsing through her veins like electricity. She had laid out her gear the night before, bib pinned, gels packed, socks folded with military precision. Now she dressed slowly, reverently, as if donning armor. In the mirror, she saw not just a runner but a woman about to cross a threshold. Her hands trembled as she tied her shoelaces twice. Always twice. Tom brewed coffee and kissed her cheek. You're ready, he said simply. Ellen nodded, though her heart thudded. Ready or not, it was time. The start area buzzed with nervous energy. Thousands of runners milled about, men and women of all ages, stretching, jogging in place, taking selfies. The air smelled of coffee, sunscreen, and anticipation. Floodlights lit the streets, casting long shadows. Rena waved from the crowd, grinning. Can you believe we're here? No, Ellen admitted, smiling back. Yes, Rena corrected. We earned this. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, calling runners to their corrals. Ellen's corral filled with people wearing shirts that read things like Boston Qualifier and 26.2 or Bust. She felt small among them, but then she remembered, every runner, no matter their pace, faced the same 26.2 miles. The road was democracy. The national anthem played. Silence fell. Ellen placed her hand over her heart, tears surprising her eyes. Not for the flag, not for the ceremony, but for herself. For the woman who once doubted, who once whispered maybe in a kitchen at midnight, now standing at the start of a marathon. The gun fired. Cheers erupted. The wave of runners surged forward, carrying her with it. Miles 1 to 6. The early miles were a blur of excitement. Spectators lined the streets, clapping, ringing cowbells, holding funny signs, worst parade ever. Toenails are overrated. Smile, you paid to do this. Ellen laughed despite the tightness in her chest. She forced herself to slow down, to find her rhythm. No heroes, Coach Dave's voice echoed in her mind. She settled into an easy pace, breathing steady. The city woke around them, shop owners sweeping sidewalks, children waving from porches, a brass band playing off-key but joyful. At mile 5, she spotted Tom and Lucas on the curb, holding a handmade sign, Go Mom Go. Her chest swelled. She waved, grinning, and their cheers followed her down the street. Miles 7 to 13. The middle miles stretched long and steady. Ellen tucked into a rhythm, sipping water at aid stations, squeezing gels into her mouth. The sun climbed higher, warming the pavement. Sweat dampened her visor, but her legs felt strong. Around mile 10, she ran beside a woman about her age. They traded smiles, then words. First marathon? The woman asked. Yes. You? Third. The first one changed my life. This one reminds me I'm still changing. They ran together for a mile before separating, but the woman's words lingered. Still changing. Ellen repeated it like a mantra. At mile 13, the halfway point, a gospel choir sang on the steps of a church. Their voices rose, filling Ellen's chest with something bigger than oxygen. She crossed the halfway mark with tears sliding down her cheeks. Half done. Half to go. Miles 14 to 20. Fatigue crept in. The crowds thinned as the course wound into quieter neighborhoods. The runners around her looked serious now, focused. Ellen's legs grew heavy, her breath rough. At mile 16, she fought a wave of doubt. 10 more miles? Impossible. She slowed, ready to stop. Then she heard a child's voice. Go, lady runner. You're awesome. Ellen turned her head. A little girl stood on the sidewalk, hand outstretched. Ellen slapped her palm lightly and felt a surge of strength, absurd and beautiful. She kept going. By mile 18, the famous wall loomed. Her legs burned, her stomach churned, her brain screamed quit, quit, quit. She remembered the bridge, the rainstorm, the blisters. She remembered Mia's voice, fear isn't the enemy. It's proof. So she whispered, proof, 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 with every step. At mile 20, she shuffled past a man collapsed on the curb, medics tending to him. The sight terrified her. But then she thought, I'm still moving. As long as I move, I am winning. Miles 21 to 25. The final stretch was survival. Each mile was its own universe. She bargained with herself constantly, run to the next lamp post. Run to the next water table. Her vision blurred with sweat and exhaustion. She lost track of time, of pace. The world narrowed to her feet slapping the pavement. At mile 23, her phone buzzed with a text from Mia. I'm at the finish. You're stronger than you know. I love you. Ellen cried as she ran, tears mixing with salt. Her chest ached, her body screamed, but her heart surged. At mile 25, the crowd thickened again, cheering wildly. Strangers called her number, go 4821. You've got this. Their belief filled her like fuel. Mile 26, the finish line. The last mile was agony. Her calves cramped, her shoulders burned, her body begged to stop. But ahead, she saw the arch of the finish line, banners snapping in the wind, a roar of voices rising. She willed her legs to move, one stubborn step after another. The world blurred, flags waving, music blasting, her name shouted from somewhere in the crowd. And then, she was across. The timing mat beeped beneath her feet. The announcer's voice boomed, Ellen Ramirez, age 50, you are a marathon finisher. A medal was slipped over her head. Heavy, gleaming, real. She staggered, laughing and sobbing at once. Tom and Lucas rushed from the sidelines, wrapping her in a hug. Mia appeared too, arms around her, tears on her face. You did it, Mia whispered. Ellen shook her head, overwhelmed. We did it. Every run, every cheer, every doubt we pushed through. We did it. Later, wrapped in a foil blanket, metal cold against her chest, Ellen looked around at the sea of finishers. Young, old, fast, slow. Each one carrying their own story, their own proof. She thought of all the times she'd been told at your age, as if age were a wall. But here, at the finish line, she knew the truth, age was not a wall. It was a ladder. Every year another rung, another vantage point. And from here, 50 looked like freedom. That night, back home, she placed the medal on the kitchen table and stared at it. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a sentence she had written into her own life. At my age, I run marathons. And no one could edit that but her. Ellen woke the morning after the marathon, sore in places she didn't know could ache. Her calves felt like stone, her shoulders tight, her toenails tender. When she swung her legs out of bed, she winced, and then she smiled. Every twinge was a reminder, she had done it. The medal lay on the nightstand, catching the light. She held it in her hands, heavy and cool, tracing the etched design. It felt both surreal and inevitable. Downstairs, Tom greeted her with coffee and a grin. How's the champion today? Champion of hobbling, she joked, shuffling toward the couch. But inside, she glowed. For the first time in a long time, she felt no need to minimize her achievement. She was, in fact, a champion, of persistence, of stubbornness, of refusing to shrink. In the days that followed, the world seemed to move at a slower, softer pace. At work, colleagues surprised her with a cake shaped like a finish line. Denise from accounting muttered, I didn't think you'd really do it, but even she clapped when Ellen cut the first slice. Neighbors stopped her on walks. We saw you in the paper, one said, holding up the local section where Ellen's name appeared among the list of finishers. She felt a flutter of pride, not because of the recognition, but because her private dream had become part of the public record. Proof that she had not imagined it. Mia called almost every night that week. Mom, I keep telling everyone about you. They're all inspired. Ellen laughed. I'm just one of thousands who finished. Exactly, Mia said. And that's what makes it so powerful. You chose to be one of them. Recovery was not just physical. 4 months, every thought had orbited around the marathon. Now, with the finish line behind her, Ellen faced a question she hadn't anticipated: what next? At first, she tried to rest, to savor. But rest felt strange after so many months of motion. Her legs twitched when she sat too long. She missed the structure of training, the purpose that came with each run. One evening, while sipping tea on the porch, Rena joined her. They sat in comfortable silence before Ellen asked, "Do you ever feel lost after a race?" "Every time," Rena said with a smile. "The finish line is never just an ending. It's a doorway. The trick is deciding what's on the other side." Ellen thought about that long after Rena left. The marathon wasn't the culmination of her story, it was a threshold. She had crossed it, and now she stood in a new room, with new doors waiting. Her body healed, and slowly she returned to running. Short, easy miles at first, loops around the park. She no longer ran to prove anything. She ran because she wanted to feel the wind on her face, the rhythm in her chest, the simple joy of movement. And something else had shifted. At the Wednesday running group, newcomers arrived, nervous, uncertain, standing like cats about to bolt. Ellen recognized the look. This time, she was the one who smiled first, who said, "Welcome. You'll be fine. Just one mailbox at a time." She saw herself in their tentative steps, their flushed cheeks, their shy questions. And she realized, her story wasn't just for her anymore. It was for anyone who needed proof that beginnings weren't limited by birthdays. Months later, Ellen spoke at a community center event about wellness. She stood at the podium, knees trembling worse than they had at mile 20. Public speaking terrified her, but when she looked out and saw women her age, and older, leaning forward waiting, she steadied. "I used to think 50 was a finish line," she began. "A place where you slowed down, shrank, stayed safe. But I've learned that 50 is a starting line. A chance to ask, what else is possible? For me, it was running a marathon. For you, it might be painting or traveling or going back to school. Whatever it is, you're not too old. You're right on time." The applause rolled over her like sunlight. In that moment, she felt the true weight of what she had done. Not just miles. Not just medals. Permission, for herself, and maybe for others. At home that night, she opened her training log and flipped to the first page. The entry was short, ran to the second mailbox. "Thought I would die. Didn't." She laughed, tears blurring her vision. From mailbox to marathon. From whisper to roar. She closed the log and wrote a new entry on the back cover: "This isn't the end. It's the doorway. Keep going." On her next run, she didn't measure pace or distance. She ran past the bakery, the library, the school swings swaying in the breeze. She waved to the old man with the roses and the child with the backpack. She felt the ground solid beneath her, the sky wide above. At mile 3, she stopped at a park bench and sat, watching other runners pass. Some were fast, some slow, some limping, some laughing. She smiled, knowing she belonged among them, not because of speed or distance, but because she had dared to start. And as she jogged home, she thought, the finish line had given her something more precious than a medal. It had given her proof that life after 50 wasn't a narrowing road, but an open horizon. That evening, Mia called again. "So what's next, Mom? Another marathon?" Ellen laughed. "Maybe. Or maybe something else. I don't know yet. But I do know this, I'm not done." "Good," Mia said. "Because I like this version of you." Ellen smiled. "So do I." She hung up, looked out at the twilight sky, and felt it, quiet but certain. The whisper that had once dared her to run had transformed into something steadier, a voice that said, "You are allowed to keep becoming." The marathon was over. But the story, her story, had only just begun.